Hello and welcome to Techfortified, where you become a tech magician. Now, supposing you have your own client and your server-side application, and you want the two applications to talk to each other, you make an XML HTTP request to your server, and then you got to understand that you have an error within your own application. Now, you'll be second guessing, like, oh, why is happening? Maybe you could be new to development, or even if you're old, sometimes we may forget to properly configure our application to do so. So there are several ways by which you can be able to solve this problem, and then you can be able to proxy your request within your client application so that it can channel your request to the server, or you can configure it like a professional, and that is where CORS comes in. Hey, wait. Now, before we continue, if you are new to my YouTube channel, please like, subscribe, and turn on notification, and share this video with your friends so that they can learn new things just like you. So let's get back to business. Now, if you're not living in the rocks, you must have heard of CORS, CORS, which stands for Cross Origin Resource Sharing. When you want your client application to communicate with your server-side application, you need to do a configuration that is known as CORS. So you can see over here, this is my client-side application. That is over here is my React boilerplate and React.js application, and I've installed Axios, and I'm trying to make request to my API, and I'm receiving this error: access to XML HTTP request at HTTP localhost colon API/post from origin, this which has been blocked by CORS policy. Yeah, so by default, browsers are only allowed to make requests to the same server. So a situation where you're going to have an inter-server communication, maybe from your client-side application that is hosted on another domain or a subdomain to another domain, you have to let your API know that this request that is coming from this particular client-side application or this server is actually permitted by you. So this is one of the security measures that is put in place by developers of browsers that will help to refute maybe another unknown user or a third party or maybe a hacker trying to access your resources on your API without your permission. So today, in today's tutorial, we are going to see how we can be able to configure our application, both our client side and our server side application, like a professional. So stay tuned to the end of this tutorial. You're going to learn new things today. Alright, Coven. So back here in our VS Code, you can see that I've created two directories over here, client and server. So within our server, this is where I've set up my nodejs express server, and then my client is just a React and boilerplate app where I created one route that is making requests. We are going to see that. So if I open the package.json under our server, you can see that I've installed and four dependencies over here. I've installed CORS dependency or package.env package express package, and under our dev dependencies, I've installed a nodejs. Actually, and we explain this. Express is the one for setting up our server.env. When you want to read environment files, environment and variables from our .env file, we make use of this .env. And as for the CORS, and is the one that I'm going to demonstrate how we can be able to make cross-origin requests. And the node more, you can see it's a dev dependency. It's used for restarting our server whenever we make any update. Alright, Coven. So when you open your index.js under your server, you will discover that I've made some configuration. I've made a basic server configuration over here. I've required env.code.config method. So this .env is a package that enables us to read .js. You will discover that I've required express, I've required HTTP, I've called the express as a function app. In order to read and .env variables, we need to port. So this .env.port, we get this our port variable that we have declared in our .env file over here, and server, and then we pass in this our express app over here. Next, I just created an array over here that contains four posts. This is just a basic configuration how we are going to simulate how a client can be able to communicate with server. That's all. And I've got app.get because we're going to be sending the request. We are going to be sending the post whenever a client application makes request with this particular endpoint. So after this, we now call our server.listen. So our server cannot just listen on our system, it needs to listen to a particular port. So I call this port variable that we created at the top over here, and then I console the log to show that our server is listening. So I'm going to show you within our CMD. When you want to start our server within our CMD, you just need to go and type node under the package.json file in our server. You can see that we created a start script called node.index.js. We created another script known as nodemon. Then we called nodemon index.js. Type in nodemon to start our server. Alright, so within your CMD over here, navigate your server directory and then type nodemon and hit enter. Allow you to start our server. Alright, you can see our server is up and running at port 5000. So anytime we make any change within our own index.js file over here, the server will restart itself due to that nodemon package. So over here in our source directory, in our libs, under libs directory, we created a simple function get post over here where we imported Axios. Axios is a library. You can use a fetch, JavaScript fetch native, but I'm making use of Axios in this example. And I've installed, by the way, if you have not installed this package, you can go ahead and install it. It's used for making XML HTTP requests to our server. So if you are using fetch, it's still okay. So I went ahead, I imported it, and then I tried to get post. And if you can see at the beginning of our page, we received an error cross origin error thereabout. So we want to fix the issue. So in order to use this post, I called it in my app.js file. So if you are familiar with React, we have what is known as React hooks. So in order to make a side effect within your application, you need to import and use effect. So we also want to maintain state within our application. So we have also imported use state. So we created about three states over here. Loading is error and post. So we use loading to track if our client application is making requests to the server. We use arrow to detect if there is an error returned from our server, and if there is no error, we now finally set our post to post so that we can go ahead and display it in our application. So you can see the get post function over here is imported from libs, is the one we made in our Axios request over there. So in order to make an async request, we created a function within this use effect known as constFetch data, and then we call our get post, and our get post is going to return is going to return an object which will contain the data and the error as we set it up over here in libs. So no matter the data can either be data populated with post or an empty array. So we set it and we say this. So our function, if it returns data with post, we set error first, and if it returns data with empty array, we set error true. So and then we set our loading first. You can see our loading by default is true, so that the page can go ahead and stop showing and loading. So you can see we say if it is loading, it should display loading, and if it's error, it should display error. And then if there is no error, we look through our post and we display it accordingly. So in order to temporarily fix that issue of CORS error when we are trying to make request to another server from our client application to a server, all we need to do, if you're using a React.js as your client-side application, all you need to do is to provide add another key, open your package.json within your client's application and add another key known as proxy, and then provide the server URL of your own application as the key. So now you can see over here we created a key proxy, and then we added the server URL. You can say our server is listening on port 5000. So we created HTTP colon, but then we want all our requests to be prepended with slash API, so that at the end of the day, if you are trying to get post, it will be HTTP full colon double forward slash localhost colon 5000 slash API slash post. So that is what you want to have. So in order to temporarily fix that cause error, this is what we need to do in our React.js. But one issue with fixing the error with this solution is that if it is in production, this thing will not work. So I don't encourage you to fix the problem with this solution, but we are going to go ahead and try it and see if you can be able to get our post. After that, we will see a proper way of fixing this issue. So let's save it. So about one thing with this solution is that whenever you provide this proxy, you must restart your client-side application. So our React.js application was already running. We're going to save this file and restart our client-side application. So let's see how we can do that. Alright, so we have opened another CMD over here. The other one is running our server, and this one it has to run our client application. And you can see I've navigated to the client directory. So if you have not done that, open your CMD, navigate to your client directory. You can see we have made changes in our package.json. So if your client application is already running, stop the server and restart it again. So in order to start our React.js application, we need to type npm start. So let's wait for it to start. Alright, Coram. So you can see that our client application is up running on port 3000 and our server side application is running on port 5000. So we are going to go ahead. Our client application was showing error initially that it cannot connect to our server, but we have proxied our server within our client application. So we're going to go ahead and then try to test our client application and see if it can successfully connect to our server and get a post. By the way, proxy server is a server that is a system or router that provides a gateway between users and the internet. So in this case, a proxy, since we have proxied our request within the client application, is going to be acting on behalf of the server for us. So whenever we make a request to the server, it is going to act as if it is the server for us and send a request to our server, and our server will send back the response. So let's test it out in our browser and see the response that we get back from the server. Wow, so when we come back to our application over here, you can see that it has successfully gotten the post from our server and displayed it in our own website or web application. So you can see that through our proxy request, our proxy and configuration has solved our issue. One thing with solving the issue with this solution is that you cannot use this in production. So whenever you try to use this in the production app, you are not going to get this. So let's see the second way by which we can be able to solve this and same issue that is much more elegant, the one that can be able to work both in development and in production. So first of all, before we proceed with our second solution, all we have to do is to remove this. I just showed you a way in which you can be able to solve this solution. Maybe you are facing this CORS error in the browser. Your client application can make request to your server application, and then you decide to research online. This is the first solution you could come up with. Maybe people over there on Stack Overflow might be suggesting this for you, but I've told you the disadvantage of using this solution is that it only works in development. Or maybe if you have a way by which you can be able to make it and work in production, that is all right. You can go ahead and use it. But this I've tried and I couldn't get to configure it to work in production. So I'm going to show you another solution where it can be able to work both in development and in production. So first of all, we remove this proxy configuration, and once we remove it, we can save the file. You remember this proxy configuration was done in our client application. So let's go back to our server and our index.js. So within our server application over here, let's go to our package.json and see the dependencies. So you can see within my package.json on the server, I installed another package known as CORS. CORS stands for Cross-Origin Resource Sharing. So when an application, the client and the server want to talk to each other, you have to let the server know that this particular request, the origin of this request is truly coming from a trusted origin. For instance, you could have your own server and then have your own client application and have your own server side, and you don't want a third party to make request to your own server. You only want any request that is coming to your own server should be from a trusted domain. It could be only your domains, or it could be the domains that you have allowed. So when you install this course, if you have not installed it, go ahead, open your CMD and type npm install course. Is you can also find it on an npm. You can see different configurations that you can be able to do. But in this tutorial, we're going to go ahead and show how we can be able to um, configure our course so that it can be able to allow requests. Maybe you want your course to allow requests from any domain, or you want it to allow requests from just a specified domain, or you want it to allow requests from all domains that make requests to your server. So we're going to do that exactly. So go ahead and install this dependency in your application by typing npm install course. Alright guys, so once you have installed your course and you want to make use of it within your own server, we first of all need to require it within our server.js file. So all we need to do is to type const course is equal to require course is a dependency or it's a package. So we have to require it just like this. So once you have required it, you know that in next phrase you can be able to pass a middleware. By the way, a middleware is a function that acts between the request time and the response time. So when requests are coming from your client application to your server, the middleware acts in between the request and the response. So maybe it could be that you want the middleware to stop the request from reaching your server, or you want the middleware to process your request, or to maybe make some validation or to authenticate. So in order to do that configuration to add our middleware, we need to call app.use. So app.use, then we need to pass calls. But remember that calls, we have to pass it as a function, and within this function we need to pass an object. So this object will now contain some certain configurations that we need to make in order to allow our client application to communicate with our server. So the first key within our object over here is known as origin. So this origin now specifies the URL that you want to specify, the URL or the domain that you want to allow requests from. So if for instance you want to allow requests from all the domains irrespective of where the request is coming from your server, all you just need to do is to pass asterisk just as a string over here to pass asterisk. Another important key that we need to pass, it is not necessary though, but if for instance your website makes use of cookies for tracking and user activities or for authentication, there is another, you need to pass another configuration known as credentials. So by default credentials is false, but you need to pass credentials true. So when you pass credentials true, it is the same thing as telling the server that server should accept cookies from your client application. So if there are cookies within the headers that are specified for this domain, those cookies will be allowed to be read by your server. So but you are going to be focusing more on this origin. So the number one step, if you want any kind of client application that is making request to your server, you want to allow it and to allow the request to be processed by your server, all you need to do is con origin key colon pass value of asterisk. So this asterisk means allow all requests from any server that is coming. Alright, so once your server application is saved, come back to your client. We need to make some adjustments so that our request can be able to point to our server. So I've created a file known as config where I'm going to make my Azure's configuration, and I created an index.js, which is this file. So you can see initially in our libs over here, we were importing Axios directly from the Axios library. But this time around, we don't want to make use of this Axios straight like this. We want to remove it from here and then import the Axios on which you are going to do the configuration. So this Axios is coming from a config, from this config file. So over here now, we import this main Axios from our library. So the next step is we have created a variable again known as Axios that start with capital A. So we want to create an instance of this Axios so that we can be able to provide a base URL. The base URL indicates the URL that we make a request to. So in this case, it is our server URL. Our server URL is hosted at port 5000, and we are going to, since we are going to make a request to port http full colon double forward slash localhost colon 5000 forward slash APS forward slash API. We want to prepend this API over here so that when we go to our libs to make a request, we just go axios.get then forward slash post. So this will take this endpoint that we have provided here and then concatenate it with this when it's making request to the server. So at the end of the day, we're going to end up with http full colon forward slash localhost colon 5000 forward slash API slash post. So if you have users, it will be like that. If you have any other thing, so to create an instance of an Axios, you call the Axios this one and then dot create a text2 configuration inside an object, the base URL which indicate the server that our API is hosted at, and you can pass with credentials. When you pass these credentials and you go on the server and you still pass credential in our course, just the way we pass it in our course, you are telling the client and the server-side application that allow cookies to be shared, so they can go ahead and share cookies as well. So now this is it. We have made this configuration. So we are going to go ahead, save these two files, and try out our client application to see if actually we can be able to make requests to our server now. So let's head over to our browser and see. Alright, so when we come over here to our browser, let's refresh the browser and see. You can see our application is still returning an error, loading, and then an error. So let's go ahead and inspect our code, our web page, and see what is the issue. Alright, you can see that we are still back at this error. Access to XSML HTTP request at so region has been blocked by CORS. Yeah, access control allow origin header in the response must not be wide asterisk. But if you could remember, I told you that if you use asterisk, any server or client application can be able to access it. So why is it so? Yeah, so but you can see if we continue with the error, it says when the request credential mode is included. The credential mode of request initiated by XML HTTP request is controlled by the with credentials attribute. Yes. So let's see it in our configuration. So back here in our VS Code, you can see that we use this configuration with credentials true, and we pass it the value of true on, and even on our server, we use and even on our server we use credentials true. So whenever you are using with credentials true, on the server side, you must not pass this origin asterisk. If you pass this origin asterisk, it's not going to work. What it expects in this origin is the URL of where the request is coming from. So in order to make our server open to any kind of request, if we decide to comment out this with credentials, and then we go, that is on the client side configuration in our Axios, that is on the client side configuration of our Axios, we say this credential, we disable it, and on the server side as well, we say credentials, we disable it, then we save everything and we try again. This time around it will work. It is open because we did not specifically specify that it should allow cookies. So it should allow this and with credentials. So this time around is going to work. So let's save it and try it in our browser and see. Alright, so back in our browser again, let's refresh the page and see if everything will be alright. Wow, we can see that there is no more error. our request has fetched and the post successfully from the server and returned, and you can see our post is showing over here in the browser, no more error. So this is one way in which you can be able to resolve this issue. But know that this solving it in this way means that your client application can be able to share cookies with your server, because you have allowed it, you have opened this domain, this, and you have opened your server to all the requests. Using that asterisk means that irrespective of where the request is coming from, our server should handle it. So, but that is not the best way to go about it. Let's see the second way by which we can be able to configure our CORS. So on our server over here, another way in which we can be able to configure this origin is to pass it through as a value, as a boolean value. So when you pass it through, it means that irrespective of where the request is coming from, the origin, the allowed request origin in the header should be equal to where the it should be equal to the URL of the request. So if our client application is hosted on port 3000, the request is coming from port HTTP full colon localhost colon 3000 to our server, the origin is going to become that the URL of that our client application. All right, so let's enable our with credentials true and credentials true. We can see initially we set origin to be asterisk, that is any server, but this one now we are setting it to true. It means that whichever the request, the client that the request is coming from, say the header to be equal to the URL of that client. That is the meaning of this, passing it a boolean value of true. So let's save all the files and try it and see. So let's refresh our page and see. So you can see that everything is still working, whether we use asterisk or we use an origin true, everything is still working. So now you know the difference between the two. When we use an origin equals and the value as asterisk, you know that we cannot be able to send them cookies to our server. But if we use true, true stands for whichever the client side that the request is coming from, set the origin header to be equal to that client URL. So you can see with that we can still be able to share our share cookies within our browser with the server, and we can also be able to get response from the server. But these two ways that I have shown you, they are not that well secured, in the sense that with these two methods, any client side that our request is coming from, our server is going to handle, or which is not too good for our application. So imagine a situation where maybe it is a hacker or it is a third party that wants to make request to our server to get some resources. Our server is going to accept the request using these two methods. So now I'm going to show you the third way in which you can be able to make your server much more secure to know which client application that your request is coming from. For instance, our application over here on the client is running on port 3000. Maybe we want to allow the request to come only from port 3000, or maybe we have a predefined URL or domains that we want to allow the request from. So how are we going to do that? All right, back here in our VS Code, I told you that this origin can be able to take a string, can be able to take a boolean, can be able to take an array. So we have seen how it can be able to take a string by providing an asterisk over here as a value, and we have also seen how it can be able to accept a boolean value of true. So what if we have some predefined URL or domains that we want to allow a request from? How do we do that? Well, number one step, if we just have only one domain that we want to allow requests from on our server, is to change this true over here to be that domain. So over here, if you want to allow requests to come only from our client application, we can type http full colon / localhost 3000. This is where our client application is hosted. So we want the origin, any origin other than this, our server shouldn't accept the request. So if, for instance, like Google tries to make requests to our server and the URL of Google HTTP full colon google.com, this calls will reject the request unless it is coming from port 3000, which in this case is our client application. So with this now, you can see that our server will be much more secured Like we know that any request that is coming is from our client application. Anything, any domain other than that, it will not accept it. So let's save this and go ahead and try it in our browser and see. Alright, so when we come back to our browser over here and refresh our page, we can see that everything still works. So this is a third method of configuring CORS that I've shown you, to pass asterisk as the origin, to pass true as the value of the origin, and to pass a single domain. So with this one, I will specify only our domain as the one with port 3000, that is where our client application is hosted, to our server, that is you only allow requests from this domain. So any domain that sends request to our server aside this domain, it will not be the request will not be processed. The person will receive an error, sorry, CORS configuration policy and violation. So, and but then what if we have a list of domains, not just a single domain, and we want to allow requests from these particular domains? How then can we be able to do that? So let's find out. All right, people. Maybe you have more than one domain that you want your server to accept requests for. So in such a situation, what do we do? All you need to do is to create an array that holds those servers. So, for instance, one of your server is listening on port 3000, one of your clients is listening is hosted on port 3000, another one on 3001, another one on 3002, another one on 3003, so on and so forth. So once you just create an array, let's assume you say allowed domains is equal to this. So all you just need to do, instead of passing a single domain over here, you just pass this array, and everything will still work as as before. So if we save this file and we go and try out our client application, it will still work because our client application is listening on port 3000. So if we go ahead and host another application on 3001, 3002, 3003, this could be your different domains that you wanted to communicate with this particular server. So just pass them as an array and pass the array as the value of this origin. So if we still go back to our client application and refresh our page, you still see the same result. So let's check it out and see. Alright, so when we go to our browser over here and refresh our page, our client application, you can see that everything is still working perfectly fine. So back here in our browser, there are different ways by which you can be able to use CORS. There are different configurations you can be able to pass to this CORS. So if, for instance, we hold our control and press spacebar, we can see the method allow headers. So you can set allow headers, you can set export headers, you can set max age. This max age takes a number. What is the maximum age of this our CORS? And another one is the method. So the method over here, you know that we have different HTTP method. We have the get, the hit, the put, the patch, the post, the delete, and some other ones like options and thereabout. So and another one you can set is the option success. So you can see by default, if our course has if our client has established connection, the status code is 204, but we can change it to 200. Maybe we can just pass it, but this one is not necessary though, but it's all up to you to pass it. We can change it to 200. We can call the method. Maybe we only want some methods. By default it takes the method that we can make use of. For instance, you want to make a full data update, you can call put app.put. If you want to make a partial data update, you can call app.patch, like that. But it has already provided those methods for us. So if you want to go ahead and still customize, allow only some methods within your application, maybe you just want only get and post, you can just pass them as an array. If you don't want them to be an array, you can as well pass it as a string separated with comma. So there is another thing which is known as preflight request. So what are preflight requests? Preflight requests are those requests that are requests such as put, patch, delete. So for such a request to occur on your client application, the browser has to establish to first of all send the pre-request with options header to check if your server allows such requests to happen. So if it sends the options header to your server before it actually when you call it in your client application, before it if it determines that your server can be able to accept that patch or put request or delete request, that is when it will successfully go. But if it discover that the server cannot handle such requests, it will throw an error within your browser. So maybe you must have seen that, but with default CORS configuration, it has eliminated most of the concerns for us. So even with as minimum as this, you are able to go well with your course, provided you have provided the domains or the single domain that you want it to listen on or to accept. And if you want to use cookies, you pass credentials as well as on your client side configuration, you pass with credentials too. With this, you can be able to exchange cookies between the browser and the server. Well, so another way in which you can be able to use CORS is instead of passing it as a global middleware, you can be able to pass it as a single middleware on a particular route. For instance, this is our route that we have over here. We can decide and call CORS as a middleware and then pass it these options. So we can just pass it those same options that we pass over there and it will work. In this case, it means that you are only applying calls to this particular route and other route that might come in the application, you are not applying the route. So, but if you want your calls to add globally, it is better to leave it as a global middleware, just the way we set it over here. So it's all optional to you, whichever way you prefer, whether you want to set it on a single route or you want to set it on as a global middleware, you can do that. Alright guys, so in today's tutorial we have talked about calls and how you can be able to configure your calls to make a established connection between the clients and the server. So, and I've explained different ways in which you can be able to apply this course. You can be able to even configure your course. So I hope you have learned something new today. Go ahead and share this video with your friends, like, subscribe, and turn on notification for more awesome tutorials like this. Remember, it doesn't cost a dime to subscribe to my YouTube channel. It's so free of charge. So just go ahead, hit that subscribe button and turn on notification for more awesome videos like this. If you subscribe, it's gonna give me the motivation to make more awesome free videos for you guys like this. So thank you and may God bless you. See you in the next video.